2 Kings 23, 31. Remember chapter 22, we had after two terrible kings, we had a young boy named Josiah who was made king. And immediately started some reforms to try to straighten out the disastrous religious situation in Judah at the time. Started by repairing the temple. And during the course of his repair of the temple, they came across the book. And Josiah had that book read to him, and he was shocked and saddened by what he read, and committed to follow everything in it, and called the people to commit to following everything in it also. But you remember that God did not relent of the threats that they read in the book, probably from the book of Deuteronomy, that Judah was going to be destroyed. He made one concession to Josiah. What was that? It won't happen. It won't happen in your lifetime. It's coming. Chapter 23 continues in Josiah's reign. And after they read the book, his reforms left no vestige, at least outward vestige, of pagan religious practices in either the south of Judah or the north. Remember, he went to Bethel, he went to Samaria, and destroyed everything there that was unauthorized by God in His Word. Every pagan practice, every pagan statue, every pagan priest was dealt with by Josiah. He left nothing to chance. He even started the Passover again, which had not been celebrated as God wanted it celebrated since the days of the judges, hundreds of years ago. And then Josiah decides, when he hears about Egypt sending an army up here along the coast right through Judah, he goes out with his army out there to stop the Egyptians from going north to fight the battle up there. And what happens to Josiah in the battle? He gets killed in the battle. And with that death, Judah will have no more godly kings. That is the last one. And that's where we are in chapter 23, verse 30 and 31. After Josiah's death, they appoint a man named Jehoahaz, who is Josiah's fourth, and oddly enough, his youngest son. And he was 25 years old, it says in verse 31, and ruled 3 months. The Bible says he was made king by the people's choice. Verse 32 tells us that he ignored all the good things that his father Josiah had done and followed the path of Josiah's grandfather and great-grandfather Manasseh and Ammon, and led Judah right back into the abominations that Josiah had spent his entire life trying to rid Judah of. But his immediate crisis, and the reason why he only rules 3 months, is found in Pharaoh again, that cost his father's life. Pharaoh summons Jehoahaz to Riblah, which is right up here, and that seems to be where he keeps his field headquarters. Now, why he asked Jehoahaz, the king of Judah, up there is not told to us. We assume that, number one, either he didn't trust Jehoahaz, or number two, he found out that he was going to be uncooperative or whatever. We do not know. And he put Jehoahaz, after ruling only 3 months, in prison, imposed a heavy tax and tribute upon Judah. Now Necho, Pharaoh, has got a problem. We don't have a king down here in this province that is under, at this particular time, my dominion. So he raises up, he puts on the throne Jehoahaz, his older brother, changes his name from Eliakim to Jehoiakim. By the way, does anybody know what these first 4 letters of all these kings' names implies or tells us? J-E-H-O. They're the first 4 letters of Jehovah. First 4 letters of Jehovah. And so it's God sustains, or Jehovah sustains, or God raises up. And that's in the name of all three of the 4 kings that will succeed Josiah. Anyway, his brother and the former king for 3 months, Jehoahaz, was then taken from Riblah by Pharaoh and exiled down into Egypt, where, by the way, he will stay for the rest of his life. Let's see, verse 35, it tells us that Jehoiakim paid tribute to Egypt, was 25 years old, and ruled 11 years from 609 to 597 BC. And he was wicked just like his younger brother Jehoahaz was before him. Chapter 24, we continue with the same king, Jehoiakim, which, by the way, means Jehovah resurrects or Jehovah raises up. His major crisis in his 4th year, which brings us down to the year 605, was an invasion by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. And he submitted to Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and paid tribute for 3 years, from 605 to 602. Rejected Jeremiah's warning not to rebel against the king of Babylon. And if he did, things would go badly for him. And during this time, notice that Daniel chapter 1 and verse 1, there was some exiles carried off by Nebuchadnezzar, exiles, and among them was the prophet Daniel. I don't think I looked, let me see exactly what it says. Daniel, I think it's exactly the same date. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And he, if you read the next few verses, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were among the first captives that we know of taken to Babylon. And Daniel and his friends stayed there for an awfully long time. And verses 2 through 4 tells us that Nebuchadnezzar, instead of coming up in person, sent his allies who surrounded Judah against them to harass them. And the Bible actually attributes those invasions to whom? To God, yes. The Lord had warned by his prophets that this would happen, that he would remove them in verse 3 from his presence, from the promised land, and he would judge them for their sins, and especially for the sins of Manasseh, who was Hezekiah's son. And you can read about that in 2 Kings 21. And I found this by John Wesley, which I thought was very appropriate to help me. It says, he said, Manasseh's sins would never have been charged upon them if they had not made them their own by their repetition. And I thought that was very helpful, because they are not being punished because of what Manasseh did. They are punished because they continued to sin just like Manasseh had. Verse 4, it says he would judge them for killing so many innocent people, and of course that would include God's prophets. And Jeremiah hated Jehoiakim, and in many places throughout his book he tells us that. And verse 4b, and I remember looking for this last week and couldn't find it. It says he was going to judge them also for the innocent blood which he shed, and for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord would not forgive. Those are chilling words. Anytime God says, I will not forgive. Next thing we read in verse 6 is Jehoiakim's death. So 9 years of ruling are passed over. By the way, let me read what Jeremiah says about how he's going to be buried. Jeremiah 22:18 and 19. I found this interesting. Therefore, thus says the Lord in regard to Joachim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, quote, they will not lament for him, alas, my brother, or alas, sister. They will not lament for him, alas, for the master, or alas, for his splendor. He will be buried with a donkey's burial, dragged out and thrown beyond the gates of Jerusalem. So, his end was not very good. Last part of verse 6, his successor, this time, is Jehoiachin, his son. So he is Josiah's grandson. The first two rulers were Josiah's sons and brothers, okay, to each other. As we look into Jehoiachin's reign, we learn that in 605, right in the middle of his father's reign, Egypt had been defeated by Babylon. Remember, Egypt was headed north through here. When Josiah got killed, the battle took place at this place right up here called Carchemish, and Babylon whipped Egypt badly there. And it was from that point on that Egypt didn't have a whole lot to say about the political and military situation around them. And because this verse 7, tells us why Jehoiakim didn't get any help from Egypt in his fight against Babylon. He was 18 years old, ruled for only 3 months, as had his uncle Jehoahaz. He was evil just like they were, and he had a crisis that he had to deal with too. An invasion and siege by Babylon. Mark your Bibles, this is 597 BC. It's 8 years after the previous confrontation. Nebuchadnezzar himself decided to come and direct his armies this time. And in verse 12 it tells us that King Jehoiachin, his mother, his servants, his nobles, and his royal officials all surrendered to the Babylonian king. And Jehoiachin was taken prisoner, year 597. And the rest of the verse 13 tells us that Nebuchadnezzar raided the royal palace and took all of the treasures and the money he could get his hands on. Verse 14 through 16 tells us that Nebuchadnezzar deported all of the people of Jerusalem, and take that with a grain of salt, because all the poor people were left. When it says all the people of Jerusalem were deported, he means everybody that was somebody. Everybody that was important. In fact, verse 14a, it says, it deported anyone who could instigate an uprising, the military, business, and government leaders, and the skilled and the wealthy. And of course, Nebuchadnezzar would want the best of the people and the craftsmen of Judah to help him in his kingdom. By the way, Ezekiel 1 and 2, this exile included the prophet Ezekiel. First two verses of his book. Verse 14, there it is. He left only the poorest of people there. He exiled Jehoiachin, his family, the royal officials, and the other leaders to Babylon. Deported the entire army of how many soldiers were left? 7,000 is all they had. And 1,000 skilled workers, and he exiled 10,000 total people to Babylon in verse 14. Remember, this is the second deportation. The first one was 8 years earlier in 605. And so he has exiled Jehoiachin, so we've got a vacant throne in Judah again. So Nebuchadnezzar appoints Jehoiachin's uncle, the third of three brothers, three of Josiah's sons. His name was changed to Zedekiah. And let's see, he was the third son of Josiah to rule, and he was the younger brother of Jehoahaz and Jehoiakim. So after Josiah, you've got three sons that rule and one grandson, every one of them evil. Verse 17, Nebuchadnezzar did the same thing that Pharaoh Necho had done. He changed, what was his name before he was? What? Mattaniah's name to Zedekiah, and what did that signify? Not the name, but the changing of the name.
I own you.
Yeah, I own you. Yes.
I can name you whatever I want to.
Yes. You belong to me and you do as I say. And of course, Zedekiah had no choice but to accept it. He was 21 years old and ruled 11 years, which was 597, I believe, to 586. Again, he was evil, and verse 20 tells us the pronouncement of judgment again of God, that they were going to be removed from the promised land. And we now learn in chapter 24 and verse 20 that Zedekiah decided to rebel against Babylon. Now, what had Jeremiah been telling them for years? Submit to Babylon, and things will go well. They will treat you well. And of course, many of the other people in Judah thought Jeremiah was a what for saying that? A traitor. And Jeremiah's life was very difficult for that very reason.
He was treated bad.
He was treated pretty badly. Anyway, that takes us to the beginning of chapter 25, where we get to the end. Zedekiah's rebellion in chapter 24, verse 20, led Babylon to a final attack and siege of the city of Jerusalem, which started in January of 588 BC. He had taken all the rest of the fortified cities in Judah except for two of them. And it's interesting, on the very same day that the commencement of the siege of Jerusalem had started, the Lord told Ezekiel in Babylonian captivity what had happened in Ezekiel 24:21. Said the siege has started. No. And Zedekiah had sworn to the Lord that he would be loyal to Babylon. And he rebels, and to his and Judah's hurt. So the Babylonian army built siege ramps of dirt around the city. And what were those for? Yeah, so they can get... That's one thing, but it gets your troops up high, at least even with the walls, so that you can fire down and see and fire and weapons down into the city itself. Yes, sir, Clay?
The illustration of that is pretty amazing if you haven't seen it. I think Josephus records it, has an illustration of it. It's amazing.
Yes.
It's unreal how big the siege weapons are and how big it just surrounds everything.
Yes. They were completely cut off. Verse 3 tells us that the famine was very severe. It lasted about a year and a half. And Ezekiel and Lamentations, written by Jeremiah, tells us that we run across cannibalism again. I won't get into that, but it got that bad again. In verse 4, the Babylonians broke through the wall, and the king and the few remaining soldiers he had hightailed it out the east side over toward the Mount of Olives in an effort to escape. But the Babylonian army pursued and captured Zedekiah before he could even get to the Jordan River. And what did the rebel army do? What does it say they did? They ran. They ran out. And we'll run into some remnants of this army a little bit later that escaped. So they took him to Nebuchadnezzar's headquarters in this Riblah again, his field headquarters, shall we say. And he was tried and sentenced by Nebuchadnezzar in verses 6 and 7. They killed every one of Josiah's sons, Zedekiah's sons, right in front of him, so that he would have to witness it. And of course, why did they do that? Was to cut off any potential heirs to the throne in Judah. And to make them suffer.
Because that's the last thing to see.
Yes. And then he puts out Zedekiah's eyes, puts him in shackles, and takes him prisoner to Babylon. I found this. In conformity with Eastern notions, which consider a blind man incapable of ruling, his eyes were put out, an operation frequently performed on young princes whom it is wished to deprive of any pretensions to the throne. So you are getting rid of all the potential threats by this particular course of action that sounds pretty gruesome to me. And Jeremiah 52:11 tells us that Zedekiah was kept in prison in Babylon until he died. Verses 8 and 9, the commander of the guard, whose name was Nebuzaradan, was sent by King Nebuchadnezzar to supervise the destruction of the city after they had taken it about 1 month later. He burned the temple, which had been there for 424 years, the palace, and every other important building in the city. He demolished the walls. He deported the people, those who lived in and outside the city, in verse 11, including those who had surrendered to Babylon. And Jeremiah had told them, if you surrender and are taken to Babylon, how would life be? It would be good.
If they would serve him,
Yeah.
he had.
If you'll serve King Nebuchadnezzar, everything will be fine. And many Jews got rich there. In fact, when the returned exiles get a green light to come back, most of them stay there. Life was good.
Lloyd,
Yes, John?
something else.
Yeah.
Zedekiah, Ezekiel said that Zedekiah would be brought to Babylon and see.
Yes. That's because he would be blinded. Yes, very good point, son. Verse 12 tells us that Nebuzaradan left some of the poor to cultivate the land to provide what for the king? Money, income, food too. Don't want the land just laying there useless. We want some income streaming in from this area. And it's interesting, so while the rich were prisoners in a strange land, the poor had freedom and peace in their own country. I hadn't thought about it that way. Hey, here's your, go ahead, take the land, take the farm, have at it. And they left them alone. The army in verse 13 broke up many of the bronze temple articles to make them small enough so that they could take them to Babylon, which they did. They took the silver and gold in verse 15, so much bronze that it couldn't even be weighed in verse 16. The commander in verse 19 then arrested the religious, the military, and the civil leaders and 60 other leading citizens, and then took all the prisoners to Nebuchadnezzar up at Riblah, same place up north there, to stand trial and be executed for treason. Again, this was to prevent any basis for someone else starting another revolt. If you get rid of the leaders, hopefully, that will stop that, or at least delay it. Right?
So what happened to the ark at this point?
What happened to the what?
The ark of the covenant?
We don't know. It's lost track up here.
A lot of speculation that the
Yeah.
priest hid it,
Yeah,
took it somewhere and hid it,
yeah,
because it wasn't named in the things that were
take it.
taken, that were written on the ark.
We don't know. We don't know. Still don't know. There's a Coptic church in Africa that claims they got it, but won't let you go back there to see. Seriously, that's today. Don't know. So in verse 21 tells us that the people were exiled from the promised land. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, like Pharaoh before him, has got a problem. I've got a devastated country and a devastated city and nobody to rule it. So what are we going to do? Well, I've gotten rid of all the royal seed and deported them and executed some of them. So he appoints a man named Gedaliah, Gedaliah, as governor over the newly formed province of Judah under the dominion of Babylon. His headquarters was in Mizpah, which is close to Jerusalem. Gedaliah was a good friend of Jeremiah and advocated the same political policies as Jeremiah did. That is, folks, if you just surrender to Babylon, things will go well with you. In verse 23, he had some army officers visit him, who must have been some of those who escaped when their king was killed, captured. And by the way, that Ishmael that you see in that verse, Jeremiah 41:1 tells us that he was of royal blood, which I think is instrumental in what is about to happen. In verse 24, Gedaliah swore that the Babylonians wouldn't harm them, encouraged them to go home and live under Babylonian rule peacefully. But these men thought just as surely as I live, me being a rebel against the king of Babylon means I'm going to die. So that's why Gedaliah told them, if you'll just surrender, things will be fine with you. However, an officer named Ishmael, and 10 men assassinated the man that Nebuchadnezzar had picked to be governor over the newly formed province of Judah. The plot was instigated for some reason by the king of Ammon, we find out in Jeremiah 40. I don't know the reason between why the king of Ammon had anything to do with this, but Jeremiah tells us he did. So Gedaliah is murdered, and I have a suspicion that since Ishmael was of royal blood, he had aspirations to try to start a rebellion and to rule Judah, as improbable as that may seem. And the effect of his murder was a disaster. The remaining refugees in Judah were forced to flee down south to Egypt to escape retaliation for what they had done in chapter verse 26. Verse 27 through 30 tell us about the release of Jehoiachin from prison. He was there for 37 years, and Nebuchadnezzar's son, Evil-Merodach, who succeeded his father as king, and Jehoiachin was treated better than any of the other exiled kings. He was a regular guest at the king's table, and he was given an allowance for the rest of his life. Now, do we still have any descendants of David around? The answer, we'll find out, is yes, we do. Yes. 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 Jehoiachin is the, yes. Right. Any questions? Because we'll stop right there. In fact, we have finished 2 Kings. John? Run out of kings. Hey, very well put. All right, since no one has said anything, next Wednesday night, it is my hope, if you folks want to, that we'll go into Ezra. The the next historical book, we're not going to go through Chronicles because that's covering the same ground basically we just covered. We're going to go into Ezra, at least through chapter 6. And after Ezra 6, the book of Esther takes place between chapter 6 and chapter 7. So we'll go through the first 6 chapters of Ezra, then go through the book of Esther without getting bogged down, and then we'll finish the book of Ezra and then Nehemiah. Any questions?
This
Butch?
made me think about how people have very changed in the aspect of you had power then, if you have power now, you're not doing anything.
Yes. Yes.
People really had.
No, they haven't. No, they haven't. That's why the Bible is so relevant today, as it was 2,000 years ago. No questions on the king? Okay, let us pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for all of your blessings. We are sorry to see the end of the kingdom, the loss of your people. But we know that you are a gracious God and that you promised that you would bring them back through the prophet Isaiah. We thank you for your mercy, and we pray that when we sin that you will cover us with your mercy. In Jesus' name, amen.